What's up, YouTube? This is Timobo. I'm back again with another video. It's been a while since I posted on this channel. So, just to keep the channel going, I'm gonna do a short response to this particular TikTok over here. And I'm just gonna point out some of the um errors that the person who made the TikTok made regarding the Bible and homosexuality, right? So this TikTok is actually a response video. So I'm doing a response to response. Ha ha ha. Yeah. So let's just get on with it, right? Let's go.
The Bible support homosexuality?
The Bible does not address homosexuality.
This is totally incorrect, by the way. And I'm gonna show this later on in the video. So I'm just gonna let the video continue playing, but just know that that's just ridiculous on the face of it.
There is a common myth that has been circulating social media recently, especially on TikTok, that the word homosexual was added to the Bible in 1946 due to a mistranslation of the word pedophile or prostitute.
Okay, yeah, now this is a very popular myth that you find on social media. They'll say the word arsenokoitai actually meant prostitute or pedophile, right? Now that's totally incorrect. It actually does refer to homosexual relationships, and I'll show why later in the video as I respond to this guy. But um, just so you know, just because the word homosexual didn't exist in the 19th century does not necessarily mean that you can't use it as a translation of a particular text, because when you're doing a translation, you translate meaning for meaning. Usually, you translate meaning for meaning. You don't do direct translations. You need to, because you're trying to get a message across, so you want the meaning of the message to preserve as you translate it from one language into another. So, it's very ridiculous when people say, oh, homosexual didn't exist in the Bible until 1946. Well, yeah, I mean, the word only became a popular use to refer to, sodomy and catamites much later in the history of the English language. So obviously, it would take some time before that word became the main translation of of what Saint Paul condemns, in particular in 1 Corinthians 6:9. Anyway, let's continue.
So rendering arsenokoitai as homosexuals is absolutely a mistranslation,
It's not.
but I would argue that the word does not refer to pedophiles or prostitutes necessarily.
However, there is zero evidence to support the idea that we should translate arsenokoitai differently than what can be derived literally from the etymology.
Well, there's plenty of reason not to do that because that would be the etymological fallacy.
No, it would not, because the etymological fallacy only works if you are talking about words which are archaic. So think of the word, or any word in like the English language, um, I don't know, stairs, right? If you try to derive the meaning of the word stairs from its etymology, that'll be very difficult, because the word probably goes back very far, all the way to Old English and the Old Anglo-Saxon, all the way to Proto-Germanic, so, and even Proto-Indo-European. So, trying to derive it from that etymology there would be very difficult to, you can't really make a good case for what the meaning of the word actually is based on its etymology. But when you're dealing with compound words which have recently come into existence, crying etymological fallacy doesn't make sense. And this is why. Let's take, for example, the word playground. Playground is a compound word that refers to a place where people go to play. You can easily derive the word playground from its etymology in the English language. Similarly, the word arsenokoitai is a compound word. It comes from the Greek word arsen, which means men, and the Greek word koite, which means bed. So, as a compound word, if you translate it directly to English, would be man bedders, which clearly, if you're looking at it from a euphemistic point of view, it's clearly referring to homosexual relations of a penetrative type. So, to say that that doesn't apply ignores the fact that we're dealing with a word which, in the context of the text of the time it was written, was clearly a compound word that had recently come into use to refer to a particular type of relationship, right? So saying that we can't derive the meaning of the word from the etymology is just, it's a misuse and an abuse really of the etymological fallacy. So so it's just, it doesn't make sense to cry etymological fallacy in this case. It would be like saying, oh, you can't use the etymology of the word playground to derive its meaning. Well, you can very easily. So when you're using etymologies to derive meaning, it really depends on the word, how old it is, and how much it's changed over the years.
But the etymology also does not support rendering homosexuals.
I'll show why that this is technically true, but also just irrelevant.
Arsenokoitai is a compound word, literally meaning man, arsen, and koitai, bed. When used as a verb, the word means men seeding men or having sex with men as they would women.
So this creator is glossing over something critical that is highlighted in that literature that is cited, and that is that arsenokite does not refer to all homosexuality, or even all male homosexuality, or even to both participants in the specific male homosexual act in view. It only refers to the active role in that act, the penetrator. The passive role is not referred to with the word arsenokite. It is referred to with the word malakos that Paul also uses in 1 Corinthians 6. And malakos means soft, and it has reference to a specific type of person occupying that role, a young man or a boy. And the young men would frequently shave to appear younger. And that is why they use the word soft to refer to them. And this had reference to the one kind of homosexual relationship in first century CE Greco-Roman societies that was considered permissible.
Okay, so now this is where it just becomes illogical, right? So he is correct, right? If you actually look at the, if you actually go and look at the words that are used in 1 Corinthians 6:9, you'll see that there are two words what are used to clearly refer to homosexuality, right? If you actually go and look at the words, you'll see that he's right. There's men who submit to, so malakoi, so it's malakoi, and or perform homosexual acts, arsenokoitai. So we've got malakoi and arsenokoitai is right. You've got the meanings here: soft, delicate, effeminate, and then you've got arsenokoitai, male engaging in the same gender activity, a sodomite, a pederast, you see, etc., 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 right? So what he's trying to do here is sort of play a trick on you, right? He's trying to tell you, well, actually, this doesn't refer to homosexuality or male homosexuality in general, because I believe what St. Paul is condemning here is male homosexuality, in particular, right? And the reason he's trying to argue this isn't the case is frankly ridiculous reason. He's saying it's referring to a specific homosexual relationship at the time of the Greco-Roman period, where you had an upper class male, going and having his, doing his pederastic behavior on a lower class young male or young boy, right? Who's made to look young, and he's engaging in this sort of behavior with him, right? Now, the problem with this is the idea that this is not culturally transmissible, and thus applying the condemnation across cultures. Number one, if you read the Greek New Testament, it uses the same words in Leviticus when Leviticus condemns homosexuality, or rather condemning male homosexuality, uses the same Greek words. So clearly St. Paul understood that even in a far removed cultural context of the late Bronze Age Israelite communities or Canaanite communities, even in that culture, when homosexuality, or rather this relationship of men on men, sexual relationships come into being, that is incorrect. That is an activity or an engagement that that is just something you have to condemn as evil and as just, it's because it refers to some, like, it takes somebody being overtaken by lust, like complete lust, to be able to um engage in something like that. And obviously in St. Paul's theology, where we are meant to subdue the body, conquer the body, this is just you allowing your passions and your lusts and your desires to rule you, and thus you're still a slave to your own sins, right? So this argument is just bad when you consider the fact that he's essentially arguing that because it refers to a particular cultural relationship, a particular type of homosexuality in this particular culture, it can't be translated to other forms of male homosexuality. And I just want to ask, that doesn't that how does that make sense to anybody? How does that make sense to you? Um, that it can't be culturally translated, because if you just look at the words that are used, and you look at them, thoughtfully, and not as so, and not in sort of this very weird, clearly polemical way. Malakoi still exists today, right? They're called bottoms. Bottoms are Malakoi. Arsenokoitai are tops. And just because a homosexual today might engage as both a top and a bottom does not mean that you can't apply this condemnation to them. Just to show you why, let's look at Leviticus 18:21. In Leviticus 18:21, is translated English Standard Version: "You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Molech, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." Now we know that if you read Deuteronomy, for example, that the Bible condemns child sacrifice, right? So um, a very good source for when you're looking for anything is Open Bible Info. It says, "You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abominable thing the Lord hates they have done for their gods, for they even burn their sons and their daughters to the fire to their gods." So what I'm showing here is that Molech, and we know in the Bible that Molech or Moloch um, was associated particularly with child sacrifice in Canaanite culture. Now, imagine somebody looks at this and says, well, we can obviously condemn the Canaanite sacrifice of their children to Moloch, but when Native Americans do it, we can't really say the same thing, because the cultural reasons why they began to sacrifice their children to their gods are different, so it's not really the same thing. Obviously, that's ridiculous, right? But it's essentially the same thing that's being done here, because we see the same practices in terms of Malakoi, who exist, and Arsenokoitai. I mean, Malakoi, think about the femboy culture in LGBT culture, right? Or even so-called transgender women, right? Trans women. They would classically fit the definition of Malakoi very quickly and very easily, especially considering most femboys are very, very young, quite young. They're young men. They're like 16, 17, 18. And if you look at the statistics of when young gay men began to have sexual forays into homosexuality, um, you find that you know their first sexual experiences are like 13, 14 with men who are older than them, right? So the idea that this is not taking place today, and that arsenokoitai and malakoi still exist today, and that condemnation does not apply to people today, or that it doesn't apply to all male homosexuality, because all male homosexuality essentially boils down to these two categories of men. It boils down to these two categories of men: the penetrator and the penetrated, right? The top and the bottom, the arsenokoitai and the malakoi. Those are the men that exist in homosexual relationships between men. So this is just, it's ridiculous to try and make the argument that it doesn't apply. Now, when he says that the Bible doesn't address homosexuality, what is he talking about? Because if you go and read Romans chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, It says, "For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which was against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the women, burned in their lust towards one another." Now, I want to note that the man I'm about to talk about here, right? The man I'm about to talk about here, who's giving the who's giving the commentary on this verse is St. John Chrysostom. St. John Chrysostom was somebody who modeled his life after St. Paul. In fact, he is considered somebody who was so well versed in St. Paul and such a great imitator of St. Paul that even in this icon, he's represented as somebody who is taught by St. Paul to give out, the word of God to the faithful so that he can teach the faithful according to the way St. Paul intended, right? So he understood St. Paul. And this is what he says about these lusts that are mentioned in Romans chapter 1, verse 26 and 27. "All these affections then were vile, but chiefly the mad lust after males. For the soul is more the sufferer in sins, and more dishonored than the body in diseases. Behold how hereto, as in the case of the doctrines, he deprives them of excuse by saying of the women that they change the natural use. For no one, he means, can say that it was by being hindered of legitimate intercourse that they came to this pass, or that it was from having no means to fulfill their desire that they were driven into this monstrous insanity. For the changing implies possession, which also, when discoursing upon the doctrines, he said they changed the truth of God for a lie. And with regard to the men again, he shows the same thing by saying, leaving the natural use of the women. And in a like way with these he also puts out of all means of defending themselves by charging them not only that they had the means of gratification and left that which they had and went after another, but that having dishonored that which was natural, they ran after that which was contrary to nature. But that which is contrary to nature has in it an irksomeness and displeasingness, so that they could not fairly allege even pleasure. For genuine pleasure is that which is according to nature. But when God has left one, then all things are turned upside down. And thus not only was their doctrine satanical, but their life too was diabolical. Now when he was discoursing of their doctrines, he put before them the world and man's understandings, telling them that by their judgment afforded them by God, they might, through the things which are seen, having been led as by the hand of the Creator, and then, by not willing to do so, they remained inexcusable. Here in the place of the world he sets the pleasure according to nature, which they would have enjoyed with more sense of security and greater glad-heartedness, and so have been far removed from shameful deeds. But they were not, whence they are quit out of the place of pardon, and have done insult to nature itself. And a yet more disgraceful thing than these is it, when even the women seek after these intercourses, who ought have more sense of shame than men. So what is he talking about here? He mentions intercourses here, and he mentions lust after males, and they change the natural use. He's clearly talking about homosexuality here, not of just males, but both men and women. Men and women engaging in intercourses that are against natural affection, that are insulting to nature, right? This clearly refers to homosexual activity. Now, we can even go and find other other fathers who comment on such things and tell us about how the church understood such verses and has always understood that verses since these verses since the first century. Oh, if placed on that lofty watchtower which you could gaze, this is Saint Cyprian, by the way, into the secret places, if you could open the closed doors of sleeping chambers and recall their dark recesses to the perception of sight, you would behold things done by immodest persons which no chaste eye could look upon. You would see what even to see is a crime. You would see that people embruted with madness of vice deny that they have done and yet hasten to do. Men with frenzied lust rushing upon men, doing things which afford no gratification even to those who do them. See, he's referring to homosexuality here because he's referring to frenzied lust upon men and doing things to gratify themselves, but they don't even get gratification from this. So he is clearly referring here to homosexual activity. And it's very clear that, St. Cyprian, you have writing in the 3rd century and St. John Chrysostom writing in the 4th. These men had a greater understanding of what St. Paul was talking about as opposed to modern scholars who are far removed and are trying to contextualize what we already have context for and can already understand. So at the end of the day, we know that Malakoi and Arsenokoitai, right, they refer to homosexual activity. We know that it's the correct translation, and it's the translation that has always been understood to be the case since the time it was written. And it's ridiculous to argue that this can't be translated to other cultures, even though homosexuality, especially between men, always takes these two roles and falls within these two categories. Okay, so that's the video. Thank you for watching and goodbye.